Hi everyone, welcome back to ISC Psychology for today's topic focusing on heredity and environment. This is a very important exam section because usually at least one or two questions come in every school exam. So stay tuned for tips on how to structure those important answers. Essentially, this topic poses two important questions. Are you the way you are because of your genes or because of how you were raised, where you grew up, and what happened to you? This chapter covers three things: what heredity means and how it works genetically, what environment means and why it matters, and the evidence for how heredity and environment interact, especially from twin studies. By the end of this video, you will have everything you need for your answers. Let us start with heredity. The word itself comes from the Latin hereditas, meaning inheritance. In psychology and biology, heredity refers to the transmission of characteristics from parents to offspring through biological mechanisms. In plain terms, heredity is the reason you might have your mother's eyes, your father's temperament, or a tendency towards a condition that runs in your family. It is a biological transmission of the traits from one generation to the next. Every human being is made up of trillions of cells. Inside almost every one of those cells is a nucleus, and inside that nucleus are 46 chromosomes, arranged in 23 pairs. Chromosomes are long strands of DNA, the chemical that carries your genetic information. Think of a chromosome as a very long instruction manual, written in a biological language. Now, within those chromosomes are genes. Genes are the specific segments of DNA on a chromosome that code for particular traits. They serve as biological blueprints. They carry blueprints for everything from your eye color and your blood type to certain aspects of your personality and your susceptibility to particular diseases. Now here's where it gets more interesting. Genes come in pairs. You inherit one copy from each of your parents. But these two copies do not always say the same thing. When they differ, how does the body decide which instruction to follow? This is where the concept of dominant and recessive genes comes in. A lot of students get scared of this part because it sounds biology heavy, but it is actually a very easy concept. Let us discuss this further. A dominant gene is one whose trait is expressed even if only one copy of it is present. It overrides the other copy. So simply put, you only need one dominant copy to see a trait expressed in an individual. We will later look at Huntington's disease, an example to see how the dominant gene works. A recessive gene is one whose trait is only expressed if both copies of the gene are recessive. If it's paired with the dominant gene, the dominant one wins and the recessive one stays hidden. So a person can carry a recessive gene without ever showing the trait and pass it on to their children. A classic example is eye color. Brown eye color is generally dominant. Blue eye color is generally recessive. If you inherit one brown gene and one blue gene, you will have brown eyes because the dominant gene wins. But you carry the blue gene silently and could pass it on to your children who might have blue eyes if they also inherit a recessive copy from the other parent. This is why two brown-eyed parents can have a blue-eyed child. The ISC syllabus specifically asks you to know two heredity-related diseases, mental impairment and Huntington's disease. Let us look at this further because they often come as short questions. Mental impairment is a heredity context, refers to the intellectual disability that has a genetic basis. One of the most well-known genetic causes is Down syndrome, which occurs when there is an extra copy of chromosome 21. Instead of the normal pair, there are 3 copies. The result is a characteristic pattern of physical features and varying degrees of intellectual disability. Another genetic cause of intellectual disability is phenylketonuria, or PKU, caused by the recessive gene that leads to the inability to process a particular amino acid, resulting in brain damage if untreated. PKU is important because it shows that even genetic conditions can be managed if detected early through dietary intervention. Huntington's disease is a progressive neurological disorder caused by the dominant gene mutation. This is significant. It is caused by a dominant gene, which means if you inherit just one copy of the mutated gene, you will develop the disease. there is no healthy dominant gene to override it. Huntington's disease causes the progressive breakdown of nerve cells in the brain, leading to deterioration in movement, cognition, and behavior. Symptoms typically appear in middle adulthood, between 30 and 50, which means a person can live for decades not knowing whether they have inherited a gene before symptoms emerge. This disease is tragic precisely because of its dominant inheritance. A person with an affected parent has a 50% chance of inheriting the disease. Now let us come to the second half of this chapter, which deals with environment. In psychology, environment refers to all external influences on an organism, everything outside the organism's biological makeup that shapes its development and behavior. The syllabus distinguishes between two types of environment, physical and social. The physical environment includes the tangible, material conditions of a person's world: nutrition, physical safety, exposure to toxins, climate, the quality of housing, and access to healthcare. These physical conditions have profound effects on development. A powerful example is iodine deficiency during infancy, which is one of the leading preventable causes of intellectual disability in the world. The genetic potential of the child may be perfectly intact, but the nutritional environment during fetal development can permanently affect the brain. This shows that environment can override genetic potential in dramatic ways. The social environment includes the people, relationships, cultural norms, and social institutions that surround a person, like family, peers, school, community, socioeconomic status, cultural values, and language. The social environment shapes personality, language development, self-concept, and emotional well-being in ways that are just as powerful as biological influences. This is the most important part of the chapter, and the question that the exam loves to ask, because neither heredity or environment act alone. They always interact. The question is how. Here is a way to think about it. Your genes set a range of possibilities. They are like a blueprint that specify what you could become under different conditions. The environment then determines where within that range you actually land. Let me give you a concrete example. Height is strongly genetic. Tall parents tend to have tall children, but nutrition during childhood has an enormous effect on whether a genetically tall person actually reaches their genetic potential. Populations that were historically malnourished have shown significant increases in average height across generations as nutrition improved, not because their genes changed, but because the environment changed. The same logic applies to intelligence, personality, and the risk of psychological disorders. A person may have a genetic predisposition to depression, but whether that predisposition actually activates often depends on environmental stresses, early childhood experiences, and social support. Genes load the gun, environment pulls the trigger. That is not a perfect metaphor, but it helps to capture the interaction and a useful way to remember it. So how do psychologists actually study the relative contribution of heredity and environment? One of the most powerful research designs is the twin study. The ISC syllabus specifically mentions three types: identical twins, fraternal twins, and separated twins. You need to know all three. Here is the logic of twin studies. If genetics were everything, then identical twins who share 100% of their DNA should be identical in every psychological trait. If environment were everything, then fraternal twins who share on average 50% of their DNA but grow up in the same household should be just as similar as identical twins. Comparing the two lets us estimate how much of any given trait is genetic. Research consistently shows that identical twins are more similar to each other than fraternal twins on a wide range of traits: intelligence, personality dimensions, and risk for certain mental disorders, even when the similarities cannot be explained by environment alone. This finding points towards a significant genetic contribution, but, and this is crucial, identical twins are not perfectly identical in psychology. Even twins sharing 100% of their DNA differ in personality, in their mental health histories, or in their specific abilities. That gap, the difference between identical twins, is the footprint of environment. Separated twin studies are the most compelling evidence. These are cases where identical twins were separated at birth or very early in life and raised in different families in different environments. If genetics were everything, they should be identical. If environment was everything, they should be completely different. Such research shows strong similarities in twins on aspects like intelligence, personality, specific interests, and even quirks, while meaningful differences exist in areas shaped by early family environment and specific experiences. Using such studies, psychologists arrive at the estimate of heritability, which is the extent to which variations among individuals with respect to a given aspect of behavior or trait are due to genetic factors. What researchers actually found is remarkable. Separated identical twins show strong similarities in intelligence, personality, interests, and even quirks, but also meaningful differences, especially in areas shaped by early family environment. The Minnesota study of twins read apart, which followed 137 sets of twins from the early 1980s, is the landmark study in this area. It found that about 70% of the variance in IQ could be attributed to genetic factors, but also documented striking environmental effects on specific traits. The conclusion from twin studies as a whole thus tells us that both heredity and environment are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone, and they always interact in complex and specific ways. So what we have been discussing is the famous nature-nurture debate, one of the oldest questions in psychology. Nature refers to genetic, biological, and hereditary influences. Nurture refers to environmental and cultural influences. For most of psychology's history, different schools took extreme positions. The behaviorists were on the extreme nurture side. They believed almost all behavior was learned through experience, and that a healthy infant could be shaped into any kind of person given the right environment. Watson famously claimed that he could take any infant and train them to become a doctor, lawyer, or thief, regardless of their genetic background. Nativist thinkers were on the extreme nature side, believing that almost all of what we are is biologically predetermined. Modern psychology has moved firmly away from both extremes. The current consensus, sometimes called the interactionist position, is that nature and nurture are not opposing forces, but deeply intertwined. Genes influence how we respond to environment. Environments influence which genes are expressed. The interaction is bidirectional and lifelong. A few specific things to help you prepare for your exams. When defining heredity, use the phrase transmission of characteristics from parents to offspring through biological mechanisms, not just genes from parents. That is too casual. For chromosomes and genes, remember 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. A gene is a specific segment of DNA that codes for a particular trait. Dominant means expressed with one copy. Recessive means it needs two copies to be expressed. For the two diseases, Huntington's disease is dominant. Mental impairment can have several genetic causes. The fact that Huntington's disease is dominant is the key point. It is why having one affected parent gives you a 50% risk. For twin studies, the ISC wants you to know all three types: identical, fraternal, and separated. For each type, you should be able to write about the relative contribution of both heredity and environment. The most common exam question in this chapter is how do heredity and environment interact to produce behavior? If you follow the below points to structure your answer, then you will score very well, as this is a very broad topic. Start by defining both heredity and environment first, then demonstrate through examples how they always interact to produce a range of possibilities, such as by including height differences or depression predisposition examples we discussed earlier. Move on to then discuss evidence from twin studies. This is by far the most important section examiners will look for. Lastly, end by explaining modern psychology's interactionist approach. That covers heredity and environment. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to ISC Psychology for more new content. We will now move on to methods of psychology from the next video, which is a very important chunk in Class 11. See you in the next one.